Hello, and a warm welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Wednesday the 8th of December, and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this evening I'm hosting the programme from Edinburgh. So first, we will have today's coronavirus update, then I will introduce this evening's guest, and then we will look at today's news headlines from Scotland and around the world together. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 3,731,893 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 2,982,273 have been confirmed negative, and 749,620 have tested positive. There are 3,077 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a desk today, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 582 were in hospital last night, 41 of whom were in intensive care. I'm sorry to say that there are 11 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive for the virus, and that means that the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 9,672. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,357,567 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, 3,965,437 had received their second dose, and 1,961,588 have received a third dose or booster. The latest daily UK figures show that 145,987 patients who had tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, and that is an increase of 161 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just in hospitals. And as it's Wednesday, we have a National Records of Scotland update. As at the 5th of December this year, 12,216 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate, according to the statistics published today by National Records of Scotland. In the week 29th November to the 5th of December this year, 88 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, and that's a decrease of 10 deaths in comparison to the previous week. 22 deaths were aged under 65, 16 were aged 65 to 74, and there were 50 deaths in people aged 75 or over. 75 deaths were in hospital, 4 were in care homes, and 9 were at home or in a non-institutional setting. The number of deaths from all causes registered in Scotland in that week was 1,314, which is 184 or 16% more than the rolling 5-year average. Now then, this evening we're lucky enough to be joined by a long-term friend and regular contributor to the programme, Peter Curran. I'd like to introduce Edinburgh's answer to Candy Dulfer. Peter, how are you this evening?
I'm fine, as well as can be expected.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that, and I'm delighted that you're able to join us in the programme this evening because there's a lot to discuss.
Indeed.
So firstly, at a noisy Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson said he had been repeatedly assured that no party took place and that he had been shocked by the emergence of the video of the mock press briefing. The Prime Minister promised that Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary and the UK's most senior civil servant, would investigate the circumstances surrounding the video and the facts surrounding what happened on 18th of December last year. Later, it emerged that this investigation would not cover another party believed to have taken place in Downing Street on the 27th of November, at which Johnson himself is said to have given a speech, or a third party alleged by former aide Dominic Cummings to have happened in the Prime Minister's flat on the 13th of November. The SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford demanded that Boris Johnson takes the only right and moral step and resigns. Mr. Blackford warned that the country faced a challenging moment in this pandemic and that when trust in leadership is a matter of life and death, the Prime Minister is responsible for losing the trust of the people. Mr. Blackford continued the Prime Minister has a duty. The only right and moral choice left for him is for his resignation. New polls conducted by YouGov and Opinium respectively also found that the majority of Scots believe that the Prime Minister is failing to tell the truth over his knowledge of last year's Christmas party. The YouGov poll concluded that 84% believe that there was definitely or probably a Christmas party at number 10 last year, and 80% believe that those at the Downing Street party definitely or probably broke COVID rules. The Opinion poll concluded that 83% believe the Prime Minister is not telling the truth, 74% believe that COVID rules at the Christmas party at Downing Street were not followed, and that 67% believe that Boris Johnson should resign. So, Peter, it appears that the Prime Minister has been caught red-handed in yet another despicable lie. His apology was struck me as being of the Irish famine variety. What happened was awful, and he apologises unreservedly, but that apology is completely divorced from responsibility, because others were to blame. So, is this story cutting through, as media types say, with the public because it's personal? Many people feel that they suffered at that time last year. I'm thinking, for example, of another contributor to this programme, Drew Hendry MP. His first grandson was born during lockdown. There was no celebration of his first Christmas with his grandparents. And then, of course, sadly, the wee man terribly sadly passed away in August of this year. So Drew Hendry never had any Christmas celebration with his firstborn grandson. So is it that personal aspect that is really driving the emotional response and the anger in amongst voters and amongst the public at large?
Well, in dealing with somebody like Boris, I mean, where do you begin? The electorate were prepared to accept almost anything from Boris, right through to him being elected leader of the party and eventually prime minister. They seemed willing to excuse anything he did. He became the legendary Teflon man, or in a parallel with Donald Trump, who openly boasted that he could walk up, I think it was Fifth Avenue, and murder somebody in plain sight, and his supporters wouldn't believe it, or that the guy he murdered had deserved it. So what does it take? Well, it seems to have taken a pandemic. It seems to have taken people realizing that there comes a point when your government really matters. It fundamentally matters, and the whole infrastructure surrounding it matters. The civil service, the opposition politicians, the medical professionals, all of these things have to hang together. And Boris, obviously, evidently, before he ever got any position of responsibility, was manifestly unfitted for any of these tasks. But when people are dying in their thousands, when people have sat at the side of their loved one being intubated because they couldn't breathe and watching them die, then suddenly they realize that politics might matter, and the people you choose might matter, and the people you believe might matter. Now, Boris's classic retreat from this is not only typical of him, it's typical of an old Etonian, it's typical of the Conservative Party as a whole, and I have to say it's typical of a great number of politicians, which is, first of all, deny, then fudge, then try and attack the opposition critics on something irrelevant. But when all else fails, ultimately blame your subordinates. And today's exercise in the Parliament of the so-called apology and the diversionary tactics all summed up the fact this man is a compulsive liar. He has seriously poor judgment about fundamental matters. He has no self-perception or understanding, and he's surrounded himself with people who were willing to tolerate that for office preferment and power. He's contemptible. How we're going to get rid of him is anybody's guess.
Thanks, Peter. I couldn't disagree with anything that you said there. We'll move on to the second related story from today, and that is that Allegra Stratton has stepped down as the government spokesperson for the COP26 climate summit after footage emerged of her joking about a party at Downing Street during the peak of lockdown rules in December last year. In a statement sent to journalists and read out to TV crews in front of her home, Boris Johnson's former press secretary said she deeply regretted joking with other Number 10 aides during a rehearsal for a later drop plan for filmed Downing Street press conferences. Ms Stratton said, "The British people have made immense sacrifices in the battle against COVID-19. I now fear that my comments in the leaked video of 20 December may have become a distraction against that fight. I understand the anger and frustration that people feel," she continued. "To all of you who lost loved ones, endured intolerable loneliness, and struggled with your businesses, I am sorry, and this afternoon I have offered my resignation to the Prime Minister." Allegra Stratton was supposed to help revolutionise UK government communications when she was appointed to host a daily White House-style press conference from Downing Street. In the end, the public will only see the one occasion of Stratton standing on the podium of the purpose-built £2.6 million briefing room in that highly damaging leaked recording featuring her laughing at a question about Number 10 holding an illegal Christmas party. Ironically, her struggle to quickly answer the question about a Christmas party in a private rehearsal in December 2020 was among the issues that led the government to ultimately decide it should not put her on air as host of the daily briefings. So, Peter, firstly, famously, Allegra Stratton was first Rishi Sunak's PR, then Johnson's PR. £2.6 million was spent on a briefing room for her, and then the plans were abandoned. It's said that after the rehearsals, one of which we've now seen, she was made Alex Sharma's PR, albeit still reporting to Johnson, and the plans to use the briefing room were scrapped. So what do you think's going on here? And specifically, it crossed my mind this afternoon, do you think that Allegra Stratton is collateral damage in Rishi Sunak's campaign to be the next Prime Minister? Well, I think that only somebody very senior or very trusted can have had access to the video that was then passed to ITV.
Well, if we could rewind a bit in her career, Andrew, I remember Allegra Stratton's relatively brief stint on Newsnight. And I knew nothing about her. I mean, at that point in the game, she'd come from nowhere as far as I was concerned. And she seemed reasonable, personable, good media person. And when I heard she was going to become Boris's front woman, if you like, I thought, why? Why is this woman doing this? And then I read her biography, if you can call it that, on Wikipedia. And I can see that she is basically, by all her background, a conservative. And she has some form even during her media thing. I mean, there was the egregious example of the woman she chose. She chose to represent a particular problem. And it brought down the furies upon her head, and rightly so. And she was forced into an apology. So I say, giving her the benefit of the doubt that she's a reasonably, well, not reasonably, an intelligent woman looking at her academic career, and she is a human being like the rest of us and has values, etc. What the hell induced her to take a position as the front man for a chronic liar, womanizer, adulterer, who grossly inept in fundamental areas, including key existential threats to the nation, climate change, risks with defense in Afghanistan, and of course the pandemic. And the only conclusion you can come to that is all of that was worth the sacrifice. I mean, if you take a parallel, it's not much of a parallel other than in the role, but Tony Blair's front man, the legendary Alistair, he had real powerful talents as a journalist and was earning good money as a journalist. And he took the Blair job because he, at that time, as many people did, including me, thought Blair was worthy of respect and had some core traditional values that, for lack of a better word, reflected Labour and the left. Now, whatever he felt he learned during that period, he did his job as effectively and loyally as he could. But if you take the shilling to work for a person like that, you must take what comes with it. And I look along that front bench. It's not hard to see why most of them are there. Have little respect, if any, for any of them. I think they underrate the damage they've done to themselves by accepting a role in that cabinet. If you have a seriously unstable and incapable, in the true sense of the word, leader, you're placed in an invidious position. Now, anybody who's worked in industry or commerce or wherever extensively knows you can't choose your bosses. Uh, you know, I've had the experience of having a boss, and I thought, I can no longer work under this man. I've got to get the hell out from under. In fact, I've had that experience twice, but I didn't choose him. But she chose, and therefore I have to say very reluctantly, Elmender. Can I also say that the reason she resigned was not what Boris said or the huge furore of public opinion. It was the fact that I put up a tweet early on this morning asking her politely to resign. So I take full credit for her resignation.
Thanks, Peter. I knew you'd be behind it somehow, and certainly your experience with bosses, I share that with you. And as you say, her background is very much educated at Latimer Upper, which is an expensive school in West London, and then surprise, surprise, Emmanuel College at Cambridge. But thinking and now and your other point is also very valid. We're talking about a human being here, who has found herself for whatever reason in circumstances which clearly are very very distressing to lots of people, least of all her. But to think to pull this back a little bit to the nuts and bolts of the situation that she found herself in, do you think that Allegra Stratton's been round to her local Metropolitan Police station to make a witness statement about what she knows about the party on 18th of December last year? Or if she hasn't yet been, do you think she should?
Well, when the news of the resignation came through, I always have the same reaction in the case of resignations in the wake of some kind of a scandal, which may be what I call induced resignations. You can go and we'll do our best for you, or you can go in utter ignominy. And the question I always ask myself is this a vindictive person? Or is this a person with such a sense of amour propre that they feel their dignity and reputation has been impugned? It wasn't their fault and they're going to get right back. I have to admit, I'm an old fashioned man. I come from another era. And I shouldn't make this distinction. I'll get women to come down hard on me in this, but I always feel more sympathy towards a woman threatened than a man threatened, to put it bluntly. That's me. In the words of the song, I'm old fashioned, but I don't mind it. I like the old fashioned things. Uh, if Allegra feels she's been hard done by and she's been forced to resign and perhaps given what I call, and I've done it myself in industry, the resign on a promise. If you resign in the right, proper way and close ranks with the power group that got you into this mess, we'll look after you. Now, all political parties do a bit of that. Not least or at least my own SNP. So I do wonder what Allegra is going to do. I also wonder who is going to demand that Allegra comes before some sort of committee of inquiry, whether it's a parliamentary one or otherwise, to tell what she knows about certain things. So that will be revelatory, to use a good word.
That's a good point, Peter. There is supposed to be a public inquiry in England into the government's handling of the COVID pandemic, and so this might be a little media frenzy in the midst of that inquiry. But we'll move on to a more focused COVID story now, if we may, and that is that at a press conference a little while ago, in addition to defending the Christmas party, which his spokesman still insists did not take place, the Prime Minister outlined new measures to be introduced in England following warnings from scientists that the Omicron variant spreads more easily, meaning there is a risk that the NHS could be overwhelmed by the volume of cases. Johnson has reintroduced the guidance to work from home where possible from Monday, which is of course the current guidance in Scotland. From Friday, face masks will be a legal requirement for most indoor areas, as they are in Scotland now. And the NHS COVID pass, which is still available with 2 vaccination doses, will also be made mandatory for indoor venues with large crowds from next week, as it is in Scotland at the moment. So, Peter, this story of the new COVID restrictions was trailed firstly this morning on the front page of the Times and the Telegraph. And that then provoked even a Tory MP to suggest that these new restrictions are in fact nothing more than a PR attempt to distract from the latest of Johnson's despicable lies. So, do you think, is this a dead cat, or is it actually a scientific response to the Omicron variant in England?
Well, this is one of these complex situations that is very difficult to answer any question in a clear-cut fashion. I'll just go back to, again, analogies from other walks of life other than politics, and politics too, of course. Faced with situations that are potentially threatening, but there's not an adequate amount of information, the decision maker is caught between two polarities. One is premature reaction, another reflex cautionary reaction, which proves in the light of later events not to have been necessary, but that premature reaction was damaging. The other is in vacillating, in delaying till we have more information. Now, it might seem always like a rational thing to wait for more information, but anybody who's ever been in perilous situations and had some kind of decision-making role in it, whether it's their own survival or the survival of people responsible for a wider population, knows that you've got to make these decisions very careful. But there is a time when instead of ready, aim, fire, it's ready, fire, and ready, fire, aim. You've got to act. And it's a balance of the two crucial things in all decisions. Risk, how do you evaluate the risk? And risk, by definition, is quantifiable. You can talk about confidence levels and confidence limits. But there's also decision in the face of uncertainty, where there can be no hard information. And in that case, you fall back on individual judgments. And it's really an assessment of, if I don't do this, what are the risks and how severe is the damage? If I do it, what are the risks and how severe is the damage of having done it inappropriately? I'll give my example I used to give in Strathclyde when I was Strathclyde Business School when I was doing negotiating skills courses. If somebody says to you just as you're about to go outside the door, be careful, the step might be slipping. Then you say, okay, I'll be careful. You don't take any huge precautions. You open the door and you may step out briskly. And you say, well, worst that's happened, I'm going to slip my backside. If somebody says, be careful when you open that door, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance today that a man-eating tiger is waiting right outside the door. The risk is low, but the consequences are devastating. It's the nuclear plant thing. I mean, nuclear installations are not supposed to go pear-shaped once in 10,000 operating years. But when they do, they have devastating consequences. So enormous proactive and costly measures are put in to guard against them. So there's that kind of decision. The other one in this is I was fascinated by the reaction of the public and the electorate on this, of people who have been personally hurt by it. And you can understand the appalling rage and resentment. I mean, if I'd lost a loved one or a member of my family or a close friend, I would be enraged. I would have lit my Glasgow blue touch paper and people had better retire at speed. But the reaction of some people was to say, Boris has now, by doing this, discredited conforming to the lockdown rules. So you've got the ridiculous situation that in some respects an electorate who were stupid enough to elect him, but to observe his lockdown rules are now saying because he broke them, we should all break them in protest, which is a ridiculous position to take. Now with Boris could do the right thing for the wrong reasons, or on occasion the wrong thing for the right reasons. There's no predicting the mindset of him. There'll be a lot of pressures on him from people who are his supporters, terrified that if he falls, they fall. That whole gruesome front line of his cabinet sitting in the House of Commons, or the good, sensible people in the party who are worried about their Tory convictions falling because of this Egypt that they've put into office. And also the whole of the civil service professionals who are obliged to back the government of the day. So very, very difficult to predict. If I had to make these decisions, I'm grossly inequipped to make them medically and other things, I would err on the side of caution. And for once, I'm relieved about Nicola's innate caution. I'll put it no higher than that. But I can't predict.
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. We'll ask you some more COVID prediction questions in due course, I can assure you. But we'll move, as it's Wednesday, it's important that we have a Brexit bonus story for you. And so a new report has shown that the UK government's prospective free trade agreements are projected to only add between 0 and 0.16% to the UK's GDP 15 years after the implementation of Brexit. The Department for International Trade estimates that the UK's agreement with Japan, which is largely based off the existing EU-Japan agreement anyway, will add 0.07% to GDP each year. If signed, the UK's agreement with Australia will add up to 0.02%, and with the US, with whom negotiations are of course now completely on hold, up to 0.16%. This follows OBR figures confirming that Brexit will shrink the UK economy by 4% compared to remaining in the EU. And that's double the 2% shrinkage that we're seeing as a result of COVID, with the GDP loss forecasted by UK government economists at least minus 5%. Commenting, the SNP's international trade spokesperson Drew Hendry MP said Brexit has cost Scotland's economy £3.94 billion and is projected to cost every person the equivalent of £1,600 in red tape and barriers to trade compared to EU membership. And now we have it confirmed that the free trade agreements, which Boris Johnson is raving about, will add less than 0.2% to the UK's GDP. It is all hollow rhetoric. For every £490 lost due to Brexit, all four possible trade deals combining New Zealand, Australia, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the USA would only make back £31. Mr. Hendry added that the best possible option for protecting livelihoods and jobs in Scotland is to become an independent country and rejoin the EU as a full member of the customs union and the single market. So, Peter, one aspect of the Brexit bonus that occurred to me and was apposite for you as a chartered member of the Institute of Human Resources, Brexiteers seem to know all about personnel and development, of course. My apologies.
I think I've got it wrong, but it is human resources, so that'll do.
Of course. Brexiteers know all about pounds and pence, especially when shipping them offshore to avoid paying their taxes, but they seem to have completely misunderstood the value in our economy of human capital. Very many of the EU citizens who kept the British economy afloat have gone because of Brexit, and I think many others who had travelled to the UK to work have left as a result of the hostile environment. And for some reason, they now prefer to remain in countries that grant them better working conditions and accord them full rights as citizens. So what do you think is it about Brexiteers that they don't seem to understand what it is that workers actually do?
All societies, to some degree, Andrew, need myths, and we all have them. And those of us who are of the independent Scotland persuasion have our great history, but also a fair amount of myths about Scotland. And we all know that there is a sort of tartan heather swords and the long grass myth about Scotland that we use when we like. But you've got to be very careful with your myths, because in the words of somebody who could tell, I'm under orders not to, could tell human excrement from Shinola, a brand of American boot polish, facts are cheers that win a ding. You can dance about facts and you can spray them with myth and lies and all the rest of it. The fact lies there calmly waiting for the cold light of discovery. And when that cold light of discovery hits it, it falls apart. So all political parties are guilty to some degree of building myths that they know in their heart of heart elements of them are not reality. I've just finished reading a very large book, wonderful book. I can honestly say it's the best book I've read in 10 years. It's one of the ones I bought, like all of us, I think, buying books from Amazon, by Fintan O'Toole, very respected Irish writer and journalist, Irish to his fingertips, a Dubliner, working class Dubliner, born in 1958. And he loves his country dearly. But he examined the myth making that led to the events of 1916, the ultimate war, civil war, the independence, and the steady myth making right up through the 90s, which was profoundly damaging to the Irish economy and especially to the rights of women and the rights of children. The whole system, the church, the legal system, the Garda, the civil service, were all up to, and the banks notably, were all up to their knees in denial of reality. Hence the waxing and waning of the Irish fortune. They've come out of this. The 90s began a process of recognition that there'd been a great hypocrisy working, and the great figures that had been behind it fell. De Valera, the Archbishop of Dublin, McQuaid. And Ireland has now come to terms with itself, and with the great revelations about the church at the millennium, I think put the final death knell on that. And the period since the millennium has been Ireland coming realistically to terms with who they are, what they are, and their place in the world and their place in Europe. The Brexit process under Farage and Boris and those like it was the exact reverse of that. It was to hide all inconvenient facts that served this take back control, the Dominic Cummings mantra. And to make that work, you had to promise the earth. So when we took back control, we would be free. Walter Raleigh would spring from his grave. Somebody would put the head back on him that had been chopped off him, and he would rampage about the globe, making great trade deals by persuasion, bribery, or sheer brutality, and everything in the garden would be lovely. It was all, and this is not swearing, I have to say, I believe this term was coined by the Ninth Legion and is passed into the vernacular. It's all bollocks, spelled B-O-L-L-O-X. So nothing should surprise them in this. How do you penetrate the mind of an electorate that's not aware of? And these are not all uneducated, unprivileged people who haven't got access to information. They've got unrivaled access to information, which no electorates ever in history have had in our present time. Unfortunately, the mass of information is also a mass of disinformation. And nothing in my schooling, nothing in a lot of people's schooling, taught people to sort out what information is valid and what is not. So what can I say more than that?
Well, thank you, Peter, and I'm grateful to you for not taking our myths this evening. But we'll move on to the next story, which is that the BioNTech and Pfizer have announced today that a 3-shot course of their COVID-19 vaccination would be able to neutralize the new Omicron variant in a laboratory test, and they could deliver an upgraded vaccine in March 22 if needed. The German and US companies said 2 doses of their vaccine resulted in significantly lower neutralizing antibodies, but a 3rd dose boosted those antibodies by a factor of 25. BioNTech and Pfizer are the first manufacturers of a COVID vaccine to issue an official update on the efficacy of their shot against Omicron. In samples of blood taken around a month after the 3rd shot, the Omicron variant was neutralized about as effectively as 2 doses neutralized the original virus identified in China. BioNTech CEO Ugur Sahin suggested that countries might consider shortening the time period between second and third doses of the vaccine to combat the new variant, citing recent moves by countries, including the UK, to bring getting a third shot forward to 3 months after the second shot. The World Health Organization classified Omicron as a variant of concern on the 26th of November, but said there was no evidence to support the need for new vaccines specifically designed to tackle the variant and its mutations. However, companies have said that they would continue efforts to bring an Omicron-specific COVID-19 vaccine to market. These findings are broadly in line with a preliminary study published by researchers at the Africa Health Research Institute in South Africa, which said that Omicron could partially evade protection from 2 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and they suggest that a third shot might help fend off infection. So, Peter, these new results perhaps plunge the future of COVID vaccination campaigns into a little bit more uncertainty. Until recently, I think researchers had high hopes that a third booster dose could provide long-lasting protection against COVID and further future variants. But with the significant immune evasion demonstrated now by Omicron, that has perhaps become less clear. So if that's so, do you think, are we in for a properly long haul here?
Well, I don't want to be cynical about big pharma. I mean, big pharmaceuticals has become a term of abuse, and there's no doubt that in the past some pharmaceutical companies have behaved abominably. But I think that the present pharmaceutical companies, well, a lot of people in the world owe their life to these vaccines, and they did a formidable job of research and development in bringing them to market. But when an individual pharmaceutical company says something, you have to remember they are in business. I mean, I don't know the exact figures. I did a lot of work for SmithKline Beecham when it was SmithKline, when it was just coming out of being Beecham pills. A lot of work. And they explained in detail to me the economy of pharmaceuticals, that you have to go through the most rigorous processes of government validation and something like a 12-year evaluation period for a new drug at massive cost with no guarantees of what can happen. And when these are passed, the natural instinct is to recoup all that valid investment. So take it with a pinch of salt. I think the jury is still a little out. They may be more or less convinced, but I think we have to wait. I can only go on my own vaccine history. I, with my wife, got the AstraZeneca vaccine, both jabs, and we then got the booster jab and the flu jab. But when we went for the booster jab, my wife got a different booster from me and a different booster from AstraZeneca. And I got a different booster from either of us. For some reason, in the hall at Ingleston, I was given the Moderna vaccine. And I didn't want to hold up people because it was a mass event at that point in time. It was hours and hours, people were queuing. But I said, how can I have a booster of a Moderna vaccine to an AstraZeneca vaccine? And the doctor, I'm sure, had an explanation, but didn't have time to make it. He was under stress and had to keep things moving. I was then called back for a second booster. I couldn't understand why I was getting a booster and a booster. And when I got to Ingleston, under pressure, NHS guy offered me a very adequate apology and said, I'm sorry, it's a mistake. And I said, well, don't apologise. You've got nothing to apologise for me. I can only express my gratitude for all I've done. But somehow there's a lack of clarity at the heart, which still comes out from time to time. Every time I think I've got a hold of which vaccines do what and which sequences will happen, something comes up to question it. So somebody needs to come in with a laser of diamond hard clarity on the pros in this and let people understand what's happening. I, like everybody else, have a natural wish to believe that there's hope here. But I don't want to fall off the log on the line of some Herald columnists who will remain nameless, who seem to distrust everything the scientists said, but everything some Bampot outlier of a scientist says, or what people in the streets say, or just don't want any infringement of their personal liberty. And the other side of it being deeply depressed and saying the original COVID and the Delta variant were just rehearsals for the big event, which is going to be the great bubonic plague and wipe huge part of civilization out. I think there's more information. All the key scientists that I respect are saying there are a number of things we cannot yet say for certain yet. And only experience, probably very bitter experience, will clarify it.
Yes. Thanks, Peter. We'll move to Europe now for our next story, and that is that the Social Democrat Olaf Scholz was sworn in as the German Chancellor today, ending Angela Merkel's 16 years of Conservative rule and paving the way for his coalition government that has promised to boost green investment and strengthen European unity. Scholz served as Vice Chancellor and Finance Minister in coalition with Merkel over the past 4 years, won a majority of 395 votes in the lower house of Parliament, the Bundestag, and after being formally nominated by the President Frank-Walter Steinmeier in the nearby Bellevue Palace, Scholz returned to the historic Reichstag building in the heart of the German capital to take the oath of office and become Germany's 9th Chancellor since the Second World War. Scholz swore to devote his energies to the welfare of the German people. In the afternoon, Merkel officially handed over the Chancellery to Scholz and wished him a steady hand as the country faces a brutal fourth wave of coronavirus infections and challenges to its democratic order from authoritarian leaders. In a short speech, Scholz hailed Merkel as a great Chancellor and thanked her for a close and trustful relationship over the past years. With his down-to-earth and no-nonsense manner, Scholz has positioned himself as Merkel's natural successor and a safe pair of hands to steer Germany through challenges ranging from tackling the climate crisis to dealing with a more confrontational Russia and an increasingly assertive China. Scholz will lead an unprecedented three-way ruling coalition on the federal level with the pro-spending environmentalist Greens and the fiscally more conservative libertarian Free Democrats, unlikely political bedfellows in the past. The new government was finally announced in Parliament at 1:30 this afternoon, after which the ministers in Scholz's cabinet took their oaths. The gender-equal new cabinet contains several firsts. Women will for the first time hold Germany's foreign and interior ministries, with the Green politician Annalena Baerbock in the former and the Social Democrat Nancy Faeser in the latter. The Defence Ministry will be held by Christine Lambrecht, the third consecutive woman in that role, and the Agriculture Minister, Cem Özdemir of the Green Party, will be the Federal Republic's first minister with Turkish roots. As the names of the new ministers were read out, the loudest cheer echoed around the chamber at the mention of Germany's new health minister, Karl Lauterbach, a studied epidemiologist and Harvard graduate, who has become a mainstay of television panel debate throughout the pandemic. He has become a hate figure for Germany's anti-vaxxers and lockdown skeptics, but was desired by many as the most qualified politician for the job in the health ministry. So, Peter, the Conservatives' failed candidate for the Chancellery, Armin Laschet, who not only lost the election but will make way as party leader next spring, tweeted, "Even if we fought for a different result, we can count ourselves lucky that there is so much mutual respect between Democrats in this country." And in the Bundestag, amid applause, delegates congratulated Scholz with fist bumps, handshakes, and flowers. One gave him a basket of red apples. So I was struck by how different this is and was from the flavour of UK and US politics at the moment. So do you think, if this is true, and this is a true reflection, is this current German style of politics perhaps a better way to go?
Well, your reaction, Andrew, as you've so expertly set it out, and the actions of other politicians, it was exactly mine. A feeling of quiet delight and deep respect for these politicians, and the marked contrast between the total inability of our own people to get these things right. My memory of German chancellors goes back to Konrad Adenauer. And one of the things Konrad Adenauer attributed his longevity as a chancellor to and as a man it was being injected regularly with monkey glands. I think the old monkey glands fad of the 30s, 40s is long gone. But I think when they get in the post in the present situation, quite a few senior politicians in the continent will feel the need of the equivalent of a monkey gland thing. The other thing is the emphasis on expertise. Now, it's always a difficult thing. I often get into arguments with friends, colleagues, about should there be a mandatory qualification? I'm not talking about the things that debar you, like being a multiple serial killer or a killer or serial rapist, or the fact that you're incarcerated at Her Majesty's pleasure. I'm talking about the ordinary MP, MSP being elected. And I'm dead against requiring a qualification entry. The only qualification should be, did the electorate trust this man or this party enough to elect him? But when it comes to forming a government, expertise must be taken into account. I have to look at our own Scottish Parliament and say, in some cases, expertise was a factor. In most, it wasn't. Now, some have triumphed in spite of their expertise, because if you send a politician to run a railway as a cabinet minister or be a minister for transport, either that politician has to have key relevant experience, or he has to have something, ideally both. But if he hasn't got the relevant experience, he has to have the ability to use experts, recognize experts that they can trust, understand the nature of experts, examine competing views of what to do. And I have to say, many cabinet appointments and governments of all sorts have neither of these qualities. I mean, Rishi Sunak, you could say, certainly had the qualities of experience of big finance, the Treasury, etc. Also seemed a very affable man. And initially, I noticed a wave of enthusiasm from the female sector of the electorate, who thought he's really a nice guy, Rishi. Other aspects of him have come through when it comes down to doing hard things. But I hope one of the things that the new German government is going to be able to do, a new German chancellor, is something that you may be coming to, I don't know. And this is Biden's huge initiative in the summit to get the countries of the world, or at least those that subscribe to the democratic ideal, together in an initial summit and then a follow-up and a year of trying to act out. I think that may well be the most crucial thing since COP26 was for the future of the planet. So I really wish them well, and I wish the EU well. And I do not wish Boris or his cabinet or the Tory party, unless they're going to engage in surgical reform of themselves, well. But I wish the opposition under Keir Starmer reluctantly well, and hope they
Thanks.
demonstrate some semblances of it.
Thanks, Peter. Somebody less positive than you suggested that using Keir Starmer was like taking a bagpiper when you're hunting for deer, but we'll pass over on that today, because we'll stay in Europe for our next story, which is that the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky today welcomed President Biden's personal role in trying to attain peace in eastern Ukraine in his first comments after Joe Biden held talks with Vladimir Putin yesterday. Speaking at a news conference, President Zelensky also hoped that Ukraine and Russia could agree a new ceasefire and prisoner exchanges when their representatives held talks on the conflict in the Ukraine's easterly Donbas region today. In general, I think it is positive that the President of the United States spoke with the President of the Russian Federation, Zelensky said. Ukraine has for years suggested that the United States could join the so-called Normandy format talks between Ukraine, Russia, Germany and France to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Today, Russia signalled that it was open to the idea. Ukraine's ties with Russia collapsed in 2014 after Russia's annexation of Crimea and Moscow-backed forces seized territory in eastern Ukraine that Kiev wants back. Kiev says that some 14,000 people have been killed in the fighting in that area since then. So, Peter, briefly, there's an interesting discussion here of negotiation tactics. Russia says that they will set out their proposals shortly. Does that suggest to you that they are serious about negotiating a peaceful settlement? Or, given the recent history in the region, is it simply Russia uh, being deceptive until the moment when they choose to invade once more? Do careful and associated to that, just careful, sensible negotiations, peace negotiations with other countries play well with Putin's base back at home?
Before I come to these very serious matters in your question, Andrew, can I just start on a light-hearted note because Ukraine is a very dark subject. Uh, One can only warm superficially to a man called not Vladimir but Volodymyr. Volodymyr Zelensky, I'll have to remember his name is spelled differently, who his background is as a comedian running his own television show called The Servant of the People, converting himself into a politician and starting up a political party called the Servants of the People. That's what Israelis call chutzpah or outrageous cheek, or in Glasgow they would say dead gallows. So I had to smile when I read all of that. Go back to Ukraine. The Ukraine situation is exactly the kind of situation that the big powers polarize in the way they're highly likely to do behind either Russia or Ukraine, it's rather like what could happen in Taiwan too. The risks of inadvertently drifting into nuclear confrontation is terrifying. It really is terrifying. Putin, I think, has worries about his pretense of democracy, which he's maintained for so long. And I think in his heart of hearts, he believes democracy and Democrats are out to get him. Frankly, I hope they are. And he wants to make this great gesture. This, in another example, not much more low key in one sense, but equally damaging, is Britain and the Falklands. You know, this great emotion, we will back this, but this is Ukraine, right on Russia's back door and part of the Soviet Republic. How far he is going in pre-negotiation. In negotiation, the situation is this. Once it becomes likely or certain that people are going to have a negotiation, the negotiation from that moment starts. Even though they haven't met, even though they haven't sat at the table, even though they haven't laid out their stalls, it starts. So what Putin says at this point may be the old American saying is, if you want to test a policy, run up the flag and see if anybody salutes. You know, you're testing the water, and there's a lot of that goes on. But it's in that testing the water that the huge risk lies, as it did in the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, Khrushchev was testing the water of America with Cuba, and we came very, very, very close to nuclear Armageddon. The gates of hell were about to open. Fortunately, both Kennedy and Khrushchev knew it. So it's a very difficult one. All I can say is if they cannot reach agreement and sensible adjustments, then they must go for what used to be called détente, a reduction of tension. But it's very worrying, and it's beyond the scope of a few minutes comment. It will be some
Of course, Peter.
negotiation.
Thanks, Peter. And we'll go to our last story now, which is that a new £11.9 million television studio that has been jointly funded by the Scottish Government and Glasgow City Council is set to be a catalyst for growth in Scotland's screen sector. The 10,500 square foot studio will be operated by BBC Studio Works, a commercial subsidiary of the BBC, providing studios and post-production services to companies including the BBC, ITV, Sky and Channel 4. Kelvin Hall in the Glasgow's West End will become the Scottish hub for major TV broadcasters and production companies, and will help meet the growing demand for TV shows in Scotland when it opens next autumn. As well as fueling the growth of the sector, Kelvin Hall is expected to boost local jobs and support the development of a skilled and diverse Scottish workforce. Through their Across the UK strategy, the BBC is expected to spend an extra £700 million cumulatively across the UK by 2027-28. The Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, Angus Robertson MSP, said, "Our level of investment in Kelvin Hall reflects the confidence we have in our fast-growing screen industries. There is unprecedented interest in Scotland as a production hub, and Kelvin Hall will be a welcome addition to the growing range of studio space being used by film and TV productions. We are working with partners to maximise the opportunities offered by the studio to develop expertise in the entertainment genre and build on existing skills and training schemes to further develop a sustainable creative economy." So, Peter, I'm not absolutely sure about this. I have very fond memories of the annual Christmas festival in the Kelvin Hall of old. But anyway, one simple question. What's your response to this news of Angus Robertson negotiating and entering into commercial relationships with the BBC at this precise moment in our history?
I don't see anything wrong with it at all. I mean, I know the BBC is the sort of bête noire in many respects of the nationalist movement or of the Yes movement. But it would be lunacy for any government to ignore the fact that the BBC has a huge role in our society. And I believe after independence, the BBC will still be there. It will still be an internationally respected broadcaster. And relationships with the BBC will be crucial in an independent Scotland facing our UK or an independent England. So I see nothing wrong with that. I, like you, have very fond memories of the Kelvin Hall. In a pre-national health era, son of a widowed mother, we had a health visitor who came, and twice a year, at entirely her own expense, she used to take me to the Kelvin Hall because my mother couldn't take me there. I have very fond memories of the Kelvin Hall. I've often felt in recent years it wasn't adequately used. And what better use could it be put to than this? And frankly, I don't think Scotland, a devolved Scotland, has the resources to do that. I think Angus is exactly right, and Nicola, I'm sure, is involved in it. I think it's very welcome, and I have high hopes that we should have a studio of our own.
Thanks, Peter. We'll come back to this in due course. I'm bearing in mind that the Republic of Ireland has access to BBC product and pays about 10% of what Scotland currently pays. And I'm minded that some of that 90% might be usefully directed to Broadcasting Scotland. But we'll come back to that in due course, because that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the financial support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us financially, and we really need that support, and we rely upon it, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work, and if you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with Scotland at 7, so please join us again then. I'd like to say many thanks to Peter for his time and his contributions this evening. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Andrew.
And I'd like to say thanks to everyone for joining us here this evening. And so that's the way it is at Very Nearly Scotland at 8. Please keep warm and keep well. Bye-bye.
Bye.